Okay. Well, that was. We do not believe in sprinkling here at FBC, even though I'm sure that won't show up on high definition. Sometimes I wonder if the people doing the filming and everything, I got one, thanks, should film in a lower resolution because old people just don't look good in high definition 1080p. End time fables. I'm not getting any pictures. Oh, it would help if we
Use our technology. There you go, sir.
Okay. There we go. End time fables. I wonder why nobody was laughing at my title. We're constantly told these things that are going to happen in the end time. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of good news at the beginning. Then we're going to do a little bit of scripture. Then we're going to talk about some of the fables that come up in our world today that I think are indicative of the time in which we live. We talk about the convergence of events each week, and it does seem that the world is disrupted. Although this week, things seem to back off a little bit. So here's an interesting thing. I saw this on Facebook the other day. Lighthouse Trails, which is a good research tool, a place to go if you want to look at some discernment issues. For example, articles on Jesus calling and mysticism coming into the church. Lighthouse Trails does a great job, and I highly recommend what they put up. They put up a thing about Roger Oakland, who's a great speaker on discernment issues and Bible prophecy. And it was about a mission that he's done in honor of his son in Kenya. And so they had a picture of some kids in Kenya. And then this picture was in the article on Facebook. This photo may show violent or graphic content. Now, this is about a Christian mission in Kenya. So I'm going to uncover the picture to show you what the great censors, the very intelligent people at Facebook consider to be potentially violent or graphic content. And please, if you have children, call them in right now and have them look at this. This was the picture that was considered to be potentially violent or graphic. Somebody at a water well washing their hands. So I could have called this end time insanity because it does seem like people have lost their minds. And the people in Silicon Valley, the little people in charge of Facebook, and I can say little people because I'm probably taller than all of them, but they think they're very intelligent. Look how smart and rich we are. Well, guess what? If this is what your algorithms are telling you, algorithms are only as smart as the people that design them. And this seems to indicate that maybe these are not designed all that well. There is good news this week, though. Up in Wisconsin, they had a race for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And it's very important in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has become, like Ohio, one of the important swing states in presidential elections. And those of you who live in central Ohio, you know that when it's presidential election time, we live in this county and then the northern part of Franklin County. We live in like one of the swing areas in the whole country. And so what happens when it's presidential election time is your phone never stops ringing with political ads and political surveys and all sorts of things and stuff in your mailbox. Well, Wisconsin is also emerging as a battleground state. It flipped in the last election, and that was one of the reasons that President Trump was victorious. And their Supreme Court has been very important. When Governor Walker was in charge, governor up there, he was constantly battling with the Wisconsin Supreme Court because Wisconsin Supreme Court would make not decisions based on the law, but political decisions. Well, they had an election recently, and the liberal's going to win, the liberal guy's going to win, this Republican guy doesn't have any chance. And in fact, if I understand it correctly, he got no support from the Republican Party in Wisconsin. So, but he ran anyway. And now it's a very close election. They'll probably have to have a recount. But by all indicators now, he has won election to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So they are now moving from a 4-3 conservative majority to a 5-2 conservative Republican majority. So that's good news, finally. So let's look at some scriptures. You know, I did a study many years ago called Famous Last Words. And what I did was I went through scripture and I looked at the words, the messages that people gave when they knew this is the last message I'm giving, or likely the last message that I'm giving. Because, you know, most people, when they're facing death, they will say what's important to them. You remember the old joke about grandparents are nice to grandchildren, they're nicer to their grandchildren than they were to their children. And the parents of the grandchildren can never figure out, why are grandma and grandpa so nice? And one comedian once said, well, they're old, they're getting ready to die, and they're getting ready to meet God. So that's why they're nice now. Some truth to that. But the same thing happens when people are giving scriptural, biblical messages, when they know that this is the last thing they're going to have an opportunity to say. What they say really is important and carries a lot of weight. They give it a lot of careful consideration. So people that we looked at that did that, I think I did Moses and Joshua, their parting words to the nation of Israel, to the Hebrews. I think Elijah, Jesus, of course, and Paul. 2 Timothy chapter 4 was probably the last thing that Paul wrote. And very likely, although you're not certain, it's very likely that he was believing that his time on earth was very short. He was in prison in Rome. He wrote this to Timothy. I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Preach the word. Be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. Now, the examples that we could give of this would be legion in today's society and in today's church. I could cite to you example after example of, say, for example, what Joel Osteen talks about. Or, well, more importantly, what he never talks about. But what people want to hear today is things that satisfy their own their desires that are not informed by biblical standards. They are godless. Now listen, I have low expectations of godless people. And I will say that those low expectations are exceeded on a regular basis in today's world. With regularity, and I'm constantly saying things like, to myself and sometimes out loud, and even my wife, she's yelling at the TV now. She really is. Or if I play something, because I listen to things that I don't agree with, and if I don't agree with them, it's likely she doesn't agree with them either, and she's, why are you listening to that? You're ruining my day, and that type of thing. So, and I have to do this, I tell her, because people have this expectation. But what people want to hear are fables on many levels. I need to, hang on a second here. I just realized that I was not getting my preview slides, so I'm not sure where to go. Some people believe that we really won't even be persecuted. Now, that comes in a whole bunch of different forms. One form would be what we call dominion or kingdom now theology, that we're going to build this great society and kingdom for God in the world, and it's going to be so great that Jesus is going to want to come back and take it over and rule. Now that goes contrary to 2,000 years of church history. In 2,000 years of church history, the church has not been able to build this kingdom anywhere on the planet. It's just not possible. I believe that the kingdom will be set up when the king returns. That's why I'm premillennial. But some people think, well, we won't even be persecuted. But Jesus in his Olivet Discourses, and we can argue whether they're exactly the same or they were done on two different occasions. In Luke chapter 21, he says, but before all these, they shall lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what you shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. He's talking to believers. So let's look at some of the things that are going on in the world today. Now look, one fable is the economy's great, everything's fine, nothing to worry about. And if you live in a place like Columbus, Ohio, where the economy is really pretty good, you might think that that's actually the way it's going to work out. Now, this is from the Financial Times this morning. Didn't even make it into their front page on Friday or yesterday. Global economy enters a synchronized slowdown, and they took a lot of data points and everything, and basically it shows how the economy it's kind of gone down to a trough, and now everything is trending downward. Don't know if it's true. I hope it's not, but I think it's a fable that the economy is just going to continue to roar forever. We spend way more money than we bring in tax revenues. In this article, they noted that countries are spending way more than their tax revenues, and therefore they're going to get to a point where they're just not going to be able to borrow anymore to spend. But as long as they can keep printing money and everybody pretends like the paper actually has some kind of value, then everything may continue to go on. There's a game out there. Now, I have never seen this game. I've talked to people that have family that are involved in the design of this game. It's called Fortnite. It is very, very popular. People that design Fortnite are multimillionaires overnight or in a fortnight. The game has become so popular that there's people that are they're losing jobs because they're essentially addicted to it. And there was an article in one of the major newspapers this week by a mother, and she said, I'm not so, maybe it was in this morning's New York Times, I'm not so upset with Fortnite. I play it with my son, and it's a great way to interact with other people. And kill them too, if. But up the road, Ashland University, this was an announcement that they made. They have now formed a division called the official site of Ashland University Athletics, Ashland Esports, to add Fortnite to its gaming titles. The Ashland University Esports program will be adding Fortnite Battle Royale to its title offerings beginning in the fall of 2018. It was announced by head coach Josh Buchanan on Wednesday. The Ashland University Esports team will be the first known collegiate esports program in the country to add the title to its official offerings. They're even, my understanding is from another press release that Ashland had, they're even offering scholarships to people who will come to college. Now, look, I understand why you would give a college scholarship to somebody who can dribble a ball and not bounce it off their feet and through a little hoop. And we hold the tournament for that in these massive sports stadiums. But I'm not so sure that this is a good trend in society and culture. Although, might say that, well, at least it's keeping them away from learning some of the other stuff they might be trying to teach them at a lot of universities today. In the church, I get on these email lists because I want to track, and this is Catalyst. Catalyst is Andy Stanley started conference. They just had one last weekend or this week, Catalyst West. I actually think it was Tuesday through Thursday. You can go stream it, get the streaming archive videos. It's like $99. It's $250 or $230 to attend live. And they bring thousands of people in. And there are other thousands of people that pay live streaming. And so I've been getting these emails, okay, whenever there's a conference, here's who's speaking, here's who's speaking. Now, I did a thing a number of years ago where Andy Stanley brought in Phileena Hurwitz. She claims to be a Roman Catholic, and she was brought in to lead the pastors and leaders at this Catalyst conference in centering prayer, mysticism. Also at that conference, it was Catalyst West in 2014, held in Dallas, Texas, or Catalyst Dallas. They gave everybody a kit to get 3 assessments under the Enneagram. Now, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Enneagram, Enneagram or Enneagram. And it's a psychological assessment tool, but it has its roots in some questionable things. By the way, I won't go into detail on this, but Marcia Montenegro, who Pastor Steve knows, Christian Answers for the New Age is her blog or website, and she's done a long series on the roots of the Enneagram and where it came from. And by the way, one of the big proponents is this guy, Ian Morgan Crone, but one of the other guys that's a big pusher of this is the husband of Phileena Hurwitz, Christopher Hurwitz. So when you have to just do the math, draw the line. This is what lawyers do. We draw these little lines to connect things. So they have Phileena Hurwitz come and do mysticism and centering prayer, and they offer the Enneagram and an experience kit for the pastors. I think her husband was probably involved with that. And he is a big pusher and proponent of this. Now, this is what the email said. This is an email from Ian Morgan Crone, who pushes this. I think IEQ9. I think there are 9 personality types in the Enneagram. According to a recent study by Cornell University, he said, the overall key predictor of success for leaders is self-awareness. I've spoken about it at Catalyst and in my book, The Road Back to You. The Enneagram personality typing system is a tool I've been using for over 20 years to help leaders cultivate self-awareness and emotional wisdom. And here's why it's so powerful. If you don't understand where to lead yourself, you'll never be able to understand and lead others. And that's what Catalyst is all about. It's about leadership. Now, in our recent history, we had a person who I would describe as, in my lifetime, the most self-aware person I have ever seen on the public stage. He spoke yesterday at the Obama Foundation Forum. Now wait, I'm not playing any clips, okay? I'm just saying is, Crone says, well, self-awareness is the key to success. Now, I don't view him as a success. I do view him as very self-aware. More than anybody I think I've ever seen on the public stage. And so he was there spreading his fables about how great it was and how great we're doing and how progressives could do better and we will make the world better and all that stuff. You can get the videos on YouTube. You can go watch it if you want to. I know some of you will do that. Here is John Kerry. He spoke this week at the University of Southern California. The word is he did not have to pay any bribes to get invited to speak. But he got there just on his own. And he spoke about the horrors of global warming. And this is an example. This is a junkyard in South Korea that they had wildfires in South Korea. There's wildfires everywhere. Everywhere you look. This is unprecedented. I've never seen this before. This happens. I'm going to play a clip of Kerry, because I want you to understand, he pushes climate change. And this is one of these, I believe, end-time fables. Listen to what he says.
And people need to understand, people are dying today, and more people will die because of the effects of climate change.
Okay, here's a little bit more.
And billions of dollars of damage is being done today, and trillions will be done over the next years if we don't move faster. Today, by acts of omission and commission, we are literally walking like lemmings over that cliff. We are unwittingly signed on to a mutual suicide pact because politicians are not responding or being held accountable for mocking the fact of what is happening and those who are advocating to do something about it. And the evidence is impossible to miss, my friends. The government panel, the intergovernmental panel with the world's best scientists who dedicate their lives to finding the truth, have told us that if we don't take unprecedented historic steps over the course of the next few years, 12 years, the next 0.5 degree increase could be absolutely catastrophic. That brings you to 1.5. You get to 2 degrees, you're talking about a whole new ballgame.
Now, he said we're dying. We're all going to die. So listen, we talk about the apocalypse, we talk about the end times and that type of thing here. What is he doing? He's worse than anything I ever talk about. I have hope at the end. Jesus is coming back to rule and reign. I wanted to intersperse this with, he gave in his talk, he gave these examples of the glaciers in Greenland are melting. And Greenland is rock. And when they melt, the water goes into the ocean. Yeah, it does. I'm pretty sure it does. So you could sail your $7 million sailboat. What he ignores, he wants to be about evidence. Go north of here. You've all been up there. Kelly's Island up in Lake Erie. The Great Lakes were carved out by glaciers that were a mile thick. They melted when there was no industrial development in the world. He wants to talk this is a fable. And look, if it does get warmer, deal with it. I've often said it's too cold to play golf at times on planet Earth. I'm not aware that it's been too warm, as long as you have water and a hat. So I did some research. So I decided to look at, he said, deaths from global warming. So I thought I would look at the death rate from all causes in the past. And I came up with 100%, except for 2 people, I think, that didn't die. In all of human history, the billions and billions and billions of people that have lived. And I thought, what's going to happen in the future? The death rate is, it's about 100% minus the R for the rapture and that type of thing. So I stand by my research. I think it's very factual. This is pestilence in the end times. Fungus, the article here, fungus immune to drugs quietly sweeps the globe. Have you heard about this? It's a Candida auris fungus. They're tearing down rooms and rebuilding rooms in hospitals because the fungus has invaded there. They don't know how to get rid of it. And it's resistant to a lot of drugs. And it's very often fatal if you get it. And they have a great map in the New York Times today talking about how it's spread. Barna came out with a study, Faith Leadership in a Divided Culture, and you can see some of the things here about issues that will affect my ability to minister in the next decade. And it talks teens and young adults dropping out of church. All clergy are concerned about that or think that will affect their ability to minister. That's 72%. If you look at Protestant non-mainline, that would be evangelical, that's 74%. Protestant mainline is 73%, 77% of Catholic. So that's a concern among all people who claim to be Christian. And we could do that. The decline of traditional families. Non-Christian people, only 44% of ministers think that, non-Christian ministers. Increasing acceptance of same-sex and LGBT orientation. Are you concerned about that? 2/3 of non-Protestant or non-mainline Protestant evangelicals, 67%, 31% of mainline. Where do you think the mainline are coming down on all of this? Freedom of religion becoming much more limited in the United States. I think these numbers should be much, much higher. I think you'll see that in just a moment. So you can blow that up and look at that. That's a recent study. And there was also another study, current social issues of concern to Protestant pastors, homosexual lifestyles, gay marriage 33%, decline of family 19%. And this is among all Protestant pastors, so it would include mainlines. Decline of the family, only 19% is of greatest concern. This is ranking. I think they could only pick one or two, so that's why the numbers are lower. Here's an article in the Daily Mail. Is America becoming godless? The number of people who have no religion has risen 266%, 1/3 of the population now in 3 decades. And what they find is that in this area over here, the trend is no religion is about 23%, Catholics is about 23%, evangelical is about 23%, mainline Protestants, they're falling off. And I will say to this, if the evangelicals continue if these people keep doing what these people did, this line will fall off the chart. So that's a big change. The biggest change, though, is this transgender thing. I'm going to play you a couple clips. This was a case in British Columbia. I'll be speaking at a conference there in the Vancouver area the first weekend in October. Anti-gay activists told to pay $55,000 to a British of Columbia candidate for public office. A male who now claims to be a female. And this person, I mean, some of the things he said were pretty insulting and direct, and he cited scripture. That was his big thing. And so this is part of the decision from the tribunal there that issued the decision that said this man had to pay $55,000 to this person. I don't even know what to say. Sometimes, it's a man, okay? I think it's a man. Ms. Ogre, this is what the tribunal said. So this is born a biological male, now claims to be female. Listen to the way the tribunal, the court, writes this paragraph. And it's a long decision. It's like 106 pages long. Ms. Ogre seeks an award to compensate her for injury to her dignity, feelings, and self-respect. She argues that given the nature of the discrimination in this case, the fact that it is ongoing and has serious impact on a vulnerable person, an award of $35,000 is appropriate. Mr. Whatcott opposes the award and argues it is unduly punitive. And it was in part based on a bill that was enacted in Canada, C-16, which was essentially the same as the Equality Act that's now pending before Congress. And I mentioned this last week that one of the concerns I have in this act is that it says the Religious Freedom Restoration Act shall not provide a claim concerning or a defense to a claim under a covered title or provide a basis for challenging the application or enforcement of a covered title. In other words, if you're going to do something based on your religion, you're going to get held liable and responsible. And this is what the Democrats have put in, and I think everybody in the Democratic Party, certainly everybody who's running for president, has signed on to this. Now, the Republicans can stand and vote it down in the Senate. I'm sure it'll pass the House. They can vote it down in the Senate, but this is an election year, and what happens in election years is everybody gets a little bit cautious about how they're acting. So I'm not confident. Now, the president could veto it, and I don't think it would. I don't think they would be able to override the presidential veto. But it's something that's concerned. There's a good article about this at the Gospel Coalition, and I agree with these conclusions. The bill represents the most invasive threat to religious liberty ever proposed in America. Its passage would sound the death knell for hopes of détente and the culture wars that pit conservative Christians against their LGBT neighbors. For progressives, it would be winner takes all. Virtually no area of American life would emerge unscathed from the Equality Act's reach. I agree 100% with what Mr. Walker said in his article. No less significant would be the long-term effects of how the law would shape the moral imagination of future generations. For progressives, the Equality Act, he says, is the rallying cry that would forever cement the legitimacy of sexual revolution ethics into federal law. The Equality Act equates Christian ethics with hatred and bigotry. And that is exactly right. Now, the Heritage Foundation had a panel discussion this week in Washington at its office, and it's up on YouTube. You can find it under the Heritage Foundation YouTube channel. I'll play you a couple clips. And on their panel, they had doctor, they had somebody who'd gone through sex reassignment surgery, they had a mother, they had a feminist, a radical feminist. I'm going to play it. In fact, that's the first clip I'm going to play you. Because she looks at the Equality Act as a radical feminist and says, well, here's what she says.
Why is this such a concern? So I get this question from my liberal friends and family all the time. They think I'm crazy. They're like, why do you care if somebody wants to identify as the opposite gender? Of course, they can never explain what they mean by identify as the opposite gender, and even that formulation totally conflates the words sex and gender, which I think is inappropriate and illogical. But my liberal friends and family are always asking me, why do you care? But the reason that I care is really, first of all and foremost, because of the parents whose stories Jennifer read, who are struggling so hard with this in their own families. But I also really care because if sex is construed to mean gender identity, what that means is that nearly all sex-segregated spaces, colleges, sports, dormitories, and women's rights in general will utterly disappear. They will completely disappear. We're also looking at the legislature, where there's a bill pending before both houses of Congress called the Equality Act. We think that is a problem because we think equality is a very good thing. Who would be against equality? Everybody likes equality. So this very innocuous sounding bill would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the legacy of Dr. King. It would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include gender identity as a legally protected category for civil rights purposes in places of public accommodation. This would utterly obliterate female-only spaces throughout society. The Equality Act would also require institutions that receive federal funding, which is many institutions in this country, it would require them to consider sex to mean gender identity for all purposes. So the Equality Act, which sounds all well and good, is an unmitigated disaster for women and girls. And the thing is, it is not possible to both enshrine gender identity in civil rights law and protect women and girls as a distinct legal category at the same time. It's just not possible. So with the Equality Act, though, Democrats have largely embraced it. I think because they're well-intentioned and they support equality. Equality is a good thing. But I really don't think that Democrats in Congress have fully explored the potential consequences of...
Well, they never did.
How about this? How about for the...
Now, this is a doctor who spoke. Now, this one should just be like, well, this is like saying the sun's going to come up. But listen to what he had to speak publicly about this. So this is Dr. Michael...
Therapists will reassure...
How about this? How about for the so-called transgender child, the gender identity? Can you find it in a blood test? Can you do testings of genetics? Or can you do a brain image and find the gender identity in there? You cannot. There is no objective test to diagnosis. Yet, we're giving very harmful therapies on the basis of no objective diagnosis. This might seem obvious if you can see the slide. There are only two sexes. Certain science publications want to make you think there's more or that it's a spectrum. You can prove this to yourself through a thought experiment. Start with yourself as a fertilized ovum and work your way backwards. You'll find a sperm coming from a male and an egg coming from a female, and this is true of 100% of cases, now and forever in the past and forevermore. Sex is identified at birth. Nobody assigns it. Doctors don't arbitrarily assign this person to be a boy and this person to be a girl, and we all know how to identify it. I would say ask someone's grandmother who doesn't read these science periodicals, and they'll tell you exactly how to identify boys from girls.
And then this is a mother.
Therapists will reassure parents that social transition is harmless and reversible. Is it really harmless to tell a child who still believes in the tooth fairy that he is the opposite sex? Isn't it quite likely that this child is just confused? If a 10-year-old girl is uncomfortable with her developing body and suddenly insists she is a boy, affirmative care means blocking this girl's puberty with powerful drugs. Doctors will tell parents this is a perfectly safe and reversible way for her to explore her gender. Affirmative care does not help this child get to the cause of her discomfort. Medicating her with these drugs is not safe. In fact, her future fertility, sexual functioning, and bone development may be negatively impacted.
And this mother had a daughter who went through this, and her problem was she could not stop it, that these hormones, puberty-blocking hormones, were given to her 14-year-old daughter. And this is they're males. They chemically castrate them. I played you a clip last week of this. This is an end-time fable on steroids and hormones. It's unbelievable. Doctors are doing this. All the good research shows that people who go through sex reassignment surgeries are 19 times, process that, 19 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. And they talk about, we care, we want equality. This is insanity. This is a fable. And I've said this before, and I'm working up a teaching on the days of Lot, days of Noah, and I stand by it. Lot didn't even have to put up with this. They didn't have hormone blockers in Lot's day. And he felt oppressed by it, and I feel oppressed by it. And that's an indicator that this is really wrong. There's this person on TLC that wrote a book called I Am Jazz, and it's read in children's books, libraries, in children's schools all over about his transition to being a female. This is a party. This was on TLC recently, just within the last month. The cake there is to represent her getting a certain male part removed from her anatomy, his anatomy. It's crazy. They had a human rights campaign dinner in LA the other night. Look who it was sponsored by. Yep. In Tennessee, they've introduced in the legislature a thing that if you're brought in, you're an employee, law enforcement or whatever, and you get sued on gender discrimination basis or whatever, that we'll provide you a defense. The Human Rights Campaign opposes that legislation. In fact, they called it, in this conference, this dinner sponsored by Walt Disney, the Slate of Hate. The SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, they're getting rid of Morris Dees and some other people and their administration. They've been labeling Christian groups hate groups for a long time, and they're getting a little bit of justice dealt to them. This is an article from one of the attorneys that opposes them, saying, we were smeared by the SPLC. The female attorney said, they were doing things to my house. Let me see if I can find the article here. In 2012, an SPLC-inspired gunman attempted to enter the Family Research Council office in Washington, D.C., which Alliance Defending Freedom, where she works, shared. A security guard was shot while subduing the attacker. My colleagues at ADF have been accosted in public places and are rightly concerned for their families. Some have even asked to have ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, removed from their company credit cards because they fear harassment. When I graduated from law school, I expected tough arguments with ideological opponents. I didn't expect to be smeared as a bigot or physically threatened simply for defending Americans' freedom to speak and live in a manner consistent with their beliefs. But the SPLC insists on vilifying rather than debating its ideological opponents. Its method of choice is the hate group label, hurled at peaceful groups that disagree with its far-left worldview. In fact, the truth is the SPLC is itself a hate group. And then there were a bunch of articles this week. Everywhere I look, this is from the New York Times. Extremes of right and left share an ancient bias. Surge of anti-Semitism in Europe and the U.S. as economies cool. And who's responsible, really, in today's world? Who's ultimately responsible for the growth of anti-Semitism? Donald Trump. The Republican Jewish Council had him at a dinner last night in Los Vegas, and they were like, oh, Trump has been great for Jewish people. And there's articles this morning like, I don't understand why people are supporting him, because he must hate Jews, right? Well, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. In German magazines, there was a article that came out looking at Muslim anti-Semitism in Germany. Their conclusion, what do you think the cause of that is? And the conclusion in this long article, you can download it and translate it if you want. Extreme Out. Final document, Project Extreme Out against anti-Semitism, empowerment instead of anti-Semitism. The cause of anti-Semitism among Muslim immigrants in Europe, Islamophobia. I know. So this is another fable. They never look at what they believe or what their book says. There was a conference here, Genius Machines, the New Age of Artificial Intelligence. And people are concerned about this in the artificial intelligence community. Deep faking photos of the earth. People like China are taking photos of the earth and re-altering, photoshopping what's actually there. And so what's there, what they say is there isn't there, or they put something there that isn't there. They're faking everything. You want China to get in charge of everything? I don't even think having Facebook in charge of a lot is a good thing. And this article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, the machines that will read your mind. Boy, how do you think that's going to go? Now, they would just say, in my case, they would just look at my YouTube channel and they would decide what prison camp, I guess, that I'm going to. So let's look at the Middle East and geopolitics for just a short time this morning. Russia is tricking GPS to protect Putin. Big article was put out, this foreign policy link to it, above us only stars. And they went through how Putin moves around the world, but when he's moving around, the GPS everywhere gets kind of messed up because Russia's interfering with it. Now, look, I know Israel probably does this. I know we probably do this. But Russia, this started back in 2015. Foreign Policy was reporting that Russia was ahead of everybody else on the curve on electronic war. Now, I don't think that included Israel because, you see Israel, Syria or whomever, back in the bombing of the nuclear reactor in Syria back in 2007. or 2008. Syria gets an advanced Russian missile defense and radar system, and then Israel sends 2 bombers and they bomb and destroy this nuclear facility and never get a shot fired at them. What's up with that? Well, somebody else has learned cloaking and spoofing technology. Modern 3D printing and analysis of ancient things. This is a bust of Julius Caesar. It is in a museum in the Netherlands, and they took that and they did 3D imaging to find out what did Julius Caesar really look like? What did the ruler of the world look like if you make it color and give him hair and that type of thing? And this is what this is on their website. It's the Aiden Museum, I think Aiden, in the Netherlands, their history and antiquities museum. This is what they say Julius Caesar actually looked like. Now that looks a little bit like a world leader today that seems to be on the end time scene. Do you know who that is? No. Really? How about Putin? Now, when I think it looks a lot like him. Just has a little bit more hair and got well, you can't see his chest, so although Putin seems to like to bring that out. And Russia's moving around. They're trying to extend their sphere of influence. They have economic issues. They have concerns, but again, from the New York Times this week, Moscow's military creep into Africa alarms the West. And we know that one of the coalition members in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that's really not kind of in place is Libya and Sudan. And there are reports this week that Russia's messing around in those areas even more. In fact, there's a attack being done by a rebel commander on a internationally recognized leader in Libya, and they say that Russia's behind it. Don't know whether it's true or not, but everybody seems to be blaming them. And Libya's an oil power. So all of these things are going on in the background, and I'm only bringing them up for you. Erdogan, they had local elections this week, and 5 of the 6 largest cities appear to have gone to not Erdogan's party, but another party. Now, he's still the leader of Turkey and will be for the foreseeable future, but there are some cracks there. They're opening, I think yesterday or today, they'll be opening that new Istanbul airport, which is on track to be the largest airport in the world. This is because Erdogan has big dreams. He wants the biggest airport. He wants to revive the Ottoman Empire. This article in Newsmax that the United States has to finally acknowledge that Lebanon and Turkey are no longer true allies, and I think the president has recognized this, and they've been cutting off the sale of F-35 stealth fighter jets to Turkey because they're buying the S-400 missile system, defense system. The Arabs met last week. They also had another conference the other day, although only of the 23 Arab countries, only 13 showed up at the meeting because a lot of them are having trouble, internal trouble. But King Salman of Saudi Arabia said that they would not accept the United States determination that Israel should have control over the Golan Heights. Syria vowed to recapture Golan from Israel by all means. Now, I don't know how much of a threat that is, since there really isn't a Syria anymore. There's some enclaves that the Assad regime, with the help of Russians and Iranians, controls. And Iran, about March 18th, Rouhani came out and they called on Iranians to put all your curses on the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Now, I read the English press that the Iranian government puts out. They have 3 English newspapers. But what I noticed was that right around the time that Rouhani said that, all newspapers that are available, I have a thing called Press Reader and Press Display that gives me access to about 6,000 or 7,000 newspapers and magazines. And so I can look at a country, all the newspapers from a particular country that are available online in a replica form, just like you would pick them up and read them. And I notice around the 18th or 19th of March, every single Iranian newspaper stopped updating. Between March 18th, 16th, I think there was a couple that updated on the 19th, until yesterday, one of those newspapers was updated online. So Rouhani puts a curse on who? Israel. Did anything happen? New York Times this morning. Iran is underwater, dozens dead over 2 weeks. Another article, deadly floods in Iran spark international row over U.S. sanctions. It's our fault, and it's Israel's fault. See, they used to claim, when they were having drought all these years, they claimed that Israel was stealing our clouds. And now they're going to blame. So they curse Israel, and then they have floods. And here's some images. Here's some little videos of the flooding. 25 of 31 Iranian provinces had historic, unprecedented flooding. There are at least 80 people dead. And from these flash floods, it just poured rain. Now, is there a connection? You know what I think, and where I've stood on this for a long time. These are pretty powerful floods. I mean, that's taking a truck down the highway. And of course, the other interesting thing is, what do you see whenever you see these things now? Everybody's got their iPhone. I was in California once. I was getting gas near the airport on my way home. And as I'm standing there, and it wasn't a very good neighborhood, probably wasn't the best place to buy gas, probably. So I'm standing there. As soon as I pick up the handle, all of a sudden, literally 25 to 30 pieces of emergency equipment, hook and ladder, and everything, nothing's above 2 stories in this whole area that you can see. Hook and ladder trucks, ambulances, fire trucks, police, they all come roaring up to this intersection, and I'm thinking, I probably made a bad decision to stop here. But you know how I concluded that I was okay? Nobody was doing this. Everybody else was just standing around. I think it was an emergency drill, but that's a way you can be practical. If you don't see people taking pictures of stuff with their iPhone, it's probably something not worth wasting your time looking at. Just sort of a rule of thumb. This in the Arab news this morning, the U.S. is going to declare Revolutionary Guards a terrorist group. Finally. And this may have impact. Listen, these Iranian groups, you have the mullahs that are in charge. They control fortunes that are huge. Now, they may live modestly. I've heard that Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, lives a fairly modest lifestyle, but he controls a fortune of somewhere between $30 and $40 billion. Soleimani, who heads up the Revolutionary Guard, controls a fortune about that large as well. And so what they do is they pay off people to support them. That's how they kind of garner their support and hold things together. This is an interesting thing that nobody ever seems to want to talk about. Palestinians, this is from the Gates Institute, why Palestinians are fleeing Lebanon. They don't think they're treated very well. This is the conversation I had with this doctor from who is in Canada now, but was from Gaza. The Palestinians are mistreated in Arab countries. Why are you always blaming Israel for everything? In fact, I think And he says, well, it's the occupation. I said, but Israel's not occupying Jordan. Are they citizens in Jordan? And he wouldn't answer the question. So look, this is reported, this came out of a Lebanese newspaper, Al Akbar, that said part of this Trump peace plan that's supposed to come out now, they say it's going to be released on May 15th. That's a very significant date. May 14th, what? Israel was reborn as a nation. Now will be 71 years ago this year. So on the 70th anniversary of that, May 14th, at least on the Gregorian calendar that we follow, what did they do? Open the embassy in Jerusalem last year. This year, they're releasing, supposedly, this is what's reported in the Israeli press today, Trump's plan, peace plan, whatever you want to call it, will be released on May 15th, which is what? Nabka Day, the day of catastrophe that the Palestinians recognize each year. What catastrophe? Israel became a nation on May 14th. And now the thing is that they're talking about giving $100 billion from the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia to get Jordan to give citizenship to these Palestinians. Now you might think, they've been there and their families, they've been there for over 70 years now. You mean they're not citizens? No, when I talked to this doctor from Gaza, I asked him this question. Can Palestinians vote in Jordan? Oh no, they're very restricted. They have no rights. They can't even work in a lot of occupations. Oh, so that's Israel's fault. Well, it's the occupation. And I'm like, and this is an intelligent person, and you can't reason with them. This was at Christ at the checkpoint. I asked him about Syria. Do they have full citizenship rights in Syria? They've been there for 70 years. Oh, no, they can't vote. They can't vote for the government. And Israel's the problem? This whole thing is made up. So I'm going to just look at a couple things real quickly. I talked about this last week. This 2,600-year-old seal discovered in the city of David, a servant of King Josiah, a good king. It talks, the New York Times article last Sunday, and I apologize, I didn't have time to really read it in depth. Look, it's put up by somebody, and essentially the gist of the article is this. And by the way, this is underneath the Silla neighborhood where they're unearthing and excavating the city of David. You see the steel superstructure there? Why are they doing that? Because there's houses and a village on top of them. And this is the Pilgrim's Way that leads to the Temple Mount that they found. And this is the lead archaeologist who's been working on this for 30 some years now. He's about 60 years old. And they're talking about this is causing a lot of problems. The Palestinians hate these archaeologists. Why? Because they find a seal that was a servant of King Josiah, a king of Israel, king of Judah. They believe they found David's palace. I think they found David's palace. I think they found David's tomb, because the kings were always buried in the palace. You go to Samaria, they've uncovered the tombs of Ahab and Omri, who founded Samaria. Ahab, the husband of Jezebel. You can see these things. So what they're saying is, yeah, we know this archaeology, and it looks like they're finding these things, but this is causing political problems today, and we really shouldn't be worried about history. Well, we shouldn't be worried about history, in your view, because it involves Jews. You don't want that connection to the land. And in this article, one person was quoted as saying, temple denial, so that this is the city of David, and then we get up to the Temple Mount, and they say, well, there never was a Jewish... Yasser Arafat started saying this back in, the 1990s or 2000. There's never been a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Never happened. And one Jewish person responded, temple denial is more serious than Holocaust denial, because it denies our complete legitimacy as a person. But here's Exhibit A as to how you refute this. This is a publication. It was published by the Palestinian Waqf, the Hajj, the most important Muslim outside of Saudi Arabia, and maybe the guy in Egypt at Al-Azhar University, handles the holy site. And in 1924, here's a copy, you can find a PDF of it online, Al-Haram al-Sharif, Jerusalem, published by the Supreme Muslim Council. And it has pictures of the Temple Mount. And you turn over to page 4, and it talks about a historical sketch of the Haram, the Temple Mount area. And here's exactly what this published by the Muslim Supreme Council under the authority of the Hajj, Aman al-Husseini, probably an uncle of Yasser Arafat. This is what this said for decades. The two principal edifices are the Dome of the Rock on a raised platform in the middle and the Mosque of Al-Aqsa against the south wall. Other buildings which we shall consider later lie the double portals of the Golden Gate appear. On every side trees break the prospect, which lend a peculiar charm to the scene. The site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the site of Solomon's temple is what? Is beyond dispute. This too is the spot, according to the universal belief on which David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And that had to change. There was another article, this was picked up on the New York Times website, put out by the Associated Press just a little over a week ago. Ancient West Bank site draws Christians in controversy. And if you go there, they have this hologram recreation of the tabernacle at Tel Shiloh, 20 miles north of Jerusalem, up Highway 60. I've been there. You walk around the center Tel and you see this site here where these tents are. They cover it over because the rain will destroy mud brick walls and that type of thing. This is where the tabernacle of Moses stood for almost 400 years. First capital of Israel when they came back from Egypt. And the dimensions, like there are fence posts, you can see the fence post holes, and you measure from this one to this one, and they're exactly the width of what the tabernacle should be. I'm sure this is just an accident. And a lot of archaeologists say, oh, that's just kind of well, we don't really know what that is. It's some kind of religious site, but we're not sure it was where the tabernacle was. It was where the tabernacle was. And they're concerned. Why are they concerned? All these evangelicals are starting to come here. It's really one of the sites up in the area that they call, it's in Samaria, but it's called the West Bank. And this is in a Jewish settlement, in the confines of a Jewish settlement, so it's open and accessible. You go to other places like Shechem and Nablus and others, if you're Israeli citizen, you can't get there. You're restricted from going there. But this one is accessible. And now they're concerned, there's like, man, over half the people coming here are evangelicals. What's going on? You know what? They believe the Bible. And they believe that this is where Samuel heard the voice of God and served in the temple or the tabernacle. One more thing. This is the election in Israel is Tuesday. Probably too close to call. Some of the things said last week during the thing, Danny Gantz was saying Netanyahu could have me killed if he could. He even blamed Netanyahu for Rabin's assassination. Crazy things. As one article says, it's his final poll predicts easy win for the right, but Gantz, you really can't tell much difference between Gantz's foreign policy and Netanyahu's. But Gantz he says some things that are really kind of, well, you saw, I just think they're kind of crazy and inappropriate. The last poll I saw, the blue and white party of Gantz and Lapid would get about 30 seats in the Knesset. Likud, which is Netanyahu's party, would get about 26. But then the question is, how do we put together a coalition? Because we have to get to 61. So who knows whether they're going to form a government, and I'm sure that that's partly why Trump's plan has been pushed back to May, because they think it may take a month, 4 or 5 weeks, for somebody to form a government. The president of Israel, Rivlin, will tell someone, I think you can form a government, you go form a coalition government that has a control of the Knesset. Israel's toughest election in 23 years. Netanyahu came out today in an interview and said no to the Palestinian state. This also came out this week. Aramco, that's the Saudi Arabian oil company, the largest profit. In fact, their profit exceeds Facebook, Apple, and Twitter combined. $111 billion they made last year. They want to build a city called Neom. They have a lot of cash. And so Trump's trying to use that to get some kind of agreement. And this is an editorial in the Jerusalem Post. The dog ate my Mideast peace plan, because it keeps getting delayed. We've been hearing about this so I'll believe it when I see it. How should Israel react? That's the big question. This is kind of an interesting thing. This was this week, even in the midst of an election, he went to Israel, or to Moscow, and met with Vladimir Putin. And Putin gave them something in return. He gave them the body of a soldier who had been killed in action in Syria 37 years ago, and he was brought home. And you can see here in the Jerusalem Post, they brought him home and buried him in a big ceremony just, I think it was Friday. And so Putin's getting a lot of good press in Israel right now, because this is very important that they bring their soldiers home to them. So who knows what will happen? It'll be an interesting week. I'm sure we'll have a few things to talk about next Sunday, do you think? Maybe you have some things to talk about Tuesday night. But I've resisted the temptation I know I have to travel some this week, and to do, stick the cell phone up and do, one of those things driving around in my car. I'm not sure that that's I'm sure if I did that, I would hear from some people that it's probably not the wisest thing to do. So I resist that temptation. Well, it'll be an interesting week though. But do you see how there are all these fables that we have? The Jews weren't in Israel. Climate change is going to kill us in 12 years. On and on and on. There's not just two genders. There's 50 or 62 or 48. And people in the end times will have their ears turned to fables. It will happen in the world. It will happen in the church. And we need to stand against it. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Pray you'll bless us this week, Lord. Give us those opportunities to share the glorious truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that Jesus lived a perfect life, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, was crucified in our place for our sins so that we could have full fellowship and relationship with God solely through faith in Jesus Christ and his finished work for us on the cross, and his resurrection, and his ascension into heaven, and the promise that he will return someday as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.